Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to our program on Kardec Radio.
Welcome to the Messengers in Our Home. Dear Kardec Radio listeners, welcome to the Messengers in Our Home. Tonight we're going to talk about chapter 33, En route to Earth. So Andre and his team are leaving the aid station and are going to Earth. And today we're going to find out what happens on the journey. Hello, Mackenzie.
Hi, Francisca. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another chapter of the Messengers in Our Home.
And as usual, before we start, we would like to invite you for our opening prayer. Taking a moment to elevate our thoughts and connect to the higher spheres. Dear Mother, Father God, Creator of the universe and of all big and small things, we thank you from the depths of our heart for the gift of life, this new opportunity we all have to learn and to grow and to come closer to you. We thank you for the many blessings we receive from you every day, and we ask you to give us the discernment so that we can see them as such. We would like to thank you as well for all the good spirits, our guardian angels, all the help that comes to us from the spiritual realm whenever we need it, even though we don't necessarily see or feel it. It is there and we are never alone. And now we would like to ask you for your permission so that we can start our meeting tonight. So be it. Here we are, the reading of chapter 33. Enjoy.
Chapter 33, En route to Earth. We still had far to travel, so after resting for a while the next morning, we said goodbye, deeply moved. I, for one, can safely say that I was very sorry to be leaving. I had received such beautiful lessons there. Alfredo and Ismalia embraced us emotionally and wished us a happy journey and success in our work. Several friends from the previous evening also joyfully wished us well. We were pleasantly surprised as we climbed into Alfredo's car. I would have a hard time describing it. It looked like a small automobile, but it had wings and was propelled by accumulated electrical fluids. Always attentive, Aniceto explained. I didn't agree to use the car because I wanted to enslave you to using less effort, but because our stay at the aid station, although brief, proved to be one of the most fruitful opportunities for acquiring the knowledge you still need. You received profound lessons regarding our disturbed and suffering brothers and sisters, as well as regarding the effects of prayer. Thus, our work has taken a big step forward, considering the fact that both of you are involved above all in the task of observing and learning. And after a short pause, he continued, but we can't take the car all the way to the Earth. I have calculated that we will only be able to fly it until noon. Then we'll have to continue on foot. Aniceto fell silent for a few seconds, smiled with a different expression, and added, but we will have to go on foot only until you have acquired spirit wings, which can overcome all vibrational resistance. Such an accomplishment cannot be far off. Your wings will depend on the effort you put forth to acquire them. All who work and cooperate with their mind turned toward God can always expect the best. This is not merely a promise that I'm making out of friendship, it's the law. Always airbound, just above the ground, the little car carried us over enormous distances. Almost exactly at noon, we parked at a humble rest stop used for refueling and repairing that type of vehicle. Our driver said goodbye, wished us a good trip, and prepared to return. The landscape then became very cold and different. The road we were on was not frightening, but it was very dark and foggy. The atmosphere became heavy, which altered our breathing. Aniceto gazed with us at the obscure vastness and said in a grave tone, 4 more hours of walking and we will be on the earth. Watch the shadows around us and take note of the overall change. Unfortunately, in most cases, the vibrational emissions of incarnate humankind are of quite a low nature, and these regions are full of dark residue from the mental matter of unevolved incarnates and discarnates. We will be crossing vast areas that are not exactly frightful, but which look quite dark nonetheless. In about 2 hours, we will encounter signs of sunlight. Quite frankly, our pilgrimage was very heavy and harrowing, and only there did I really perceive the enormous difference between the ordinary road linking the Earth's surface to No Solar and the one we were now traveling on foot, having to overcome great obstacles. I felt moved as I pondered the sacrifice of the great spirit missionaries who help humans. I understood how meritorious their service is and how they need special personal qualities and extraordinary goodwill in order to give ongoing help to incarnates. Monsters hiding in the dark background of the landscape fled at our approach. They were indescribable, and in compliance with Aniceto's orders, I cannot offer any information about them so as not to create mental images of an inferior nature in the minds of those who perhaps may read my humble account. At the time predicted by our guide, we caught a glimpse of the light of the sun once again, as if it were early morning. The spectacle was magnificent and new to me. Mild warmth began to reinvigorate us. Aniceto gazed at the wonderful sight of the rays of light piercing the darkness, and with eyes moist with tears, he said, "Let us thank the Lord of worlds for the blessing of the sun. In physical nature, it is the best image of God we know of. The sun is displayed in the most varied combinations within the solar system according to the substance of the realms we inhabit. The sun shines in No Solar in accordance with the basic elements of life there, while it shines on the earth in accordance with the magnetic qualities of the planet's surface. Furthermore, it appears differently on Jupiter and illuminates Venus with another kind of light. It appears on Saturn in yet another shining garment. Even so, it is always the same, always the radiant seat of our vital energies." Deeply moved, we continued on, and in a short time, the sublime star appeared in the position just before twilight. On other occasions, the road I was traveling was always lighted and easy to navigate due to my volitation ability, and so I had never had to pay much attention to it. This road, however, passed through dense fog, and I noticed profound differences. At a certain distance, the earth appeared not in spherical form. We weren't very far from its surface, but as a landscape interpenetrating the vast regions of the spirit world. As sunset approached, the sun shone like an enormous golden lamp. Aniceto seemed extraordinarily happy and exclaimed, "We have entered the zone that directly influences the Earth's surface. From here on, we will be able to practice volitation by using our knowledge of transforming centripetal force. The light bathing us is a result of the magnetic contact between the positive energy of the sun and the negative energy of the planetary mass. Let's keep moving. It won't be long before we enter Rio de Janeiro." I felt the urge to ask something about direction. "How will we find our way around?" I asked. "Before anything else," answered our instructor, "we must not forget that our colonies are situated in the magnetic field of South America. Any ordinary compass would work, but in our case, we must educate our minds and find our way around by using the field's unique energy." We used volitation once again, and shortly the forests of Petropolis came into view. A few more minutes and we were able to observe the major arteries of Rio. Then, at our instructor's suggestion, we proceeded to the seacoast to take long, deep breaths of air. Vicente and I were positively exhausted. We realized that the effort had been significant for our scanty energies. Passers-by hurried along indifferent to our presence, their minds weighed down with problems of a material nature. Packed buses honked their horns. The large bay seemed full of renewing energies. When the first electric lights came on, Aniceto invited us amiably. "Let's take a break. You two look exhausted. I'll show you that No Solar also has some retreats on the planet's surface." We already heard the reading of the chapter, so we know what's happening. Andre, Vicente, and Aniceto are coming from or are leaving the Campo da Paz aid station and going to Earth, going to find the workers that live on Earth to help the incarnates, right? So they're going to have interactions both with incarnate spirits and discarnate spirits here on Earth. And this chapter deals with this movement that they're doing, or this trip that they're going on from Campo da Paz to Earth. It is a very interesting chapter, but we have to remember that this one is more or less like an introduction or an interlude between what we just had up to chapter 32 and what we're going to have from chapter 34 onwards. Why am I mentioning this? If you go back to the beginning of the study, to one of the very first lessons, maybe the first or the second chapter that we had on the messengers in our home program, you're going to remember that, and you're going to check there, that we said that this book is more or less divided in two parts, or in three parts. The first one going from chapter 1 to chapter 13, and then the second part that we just finished from chapter 14 to this chapter 33 or to chapter 32, and then the third part, which begins right now at chapter 33 up to the end of the book, which is their mission, or the mission that they set up for themselves in the beginning of the book. So these two first parts, we can clearly label them as preparation, as chapters of preparation for the work that they're going to develop once they reach Earth, and more specifically once they reach Rio de Janeiro, where their work is going to be based on. So this is, like I said, an interlude, or a chapter that's in between, in some way, of these two first parts, which we can in some way divide in, merge together as one part, and then this second part. And that's the reason why the chapter starts as it does, because Andre and everybody, naturally we hear more about Andre than the others, but he tells us that they embraced Alfredo and Ismalia, and all of the friends, or several friends, joined them, and then join them to wish well for the group that's going to Earth. And so it is the last time that we're going to hear about these characters, or these spirits, in this book. This happens as it happens in life. Sometimes we just finish one journey to start another journey, and some of the people that we meet, sometimes we go back and talk to them, sometimes we don't talk to them anymore. Not that we don't remember them and that they don't remember us, but it's just one part of the learning process, right? So they all leave at this moment. Naturally, Andre still lives, and maybe he still has contact with all these spirits, or some of these spirits, as their lives intersected and still intersect up to this day, if they are still discarnated and still working at the places where they were working when he wrote this book to us. But as it happens to all of us, this is just one small part of our journey. So they start their journey, start their trip to Earth, and Andre says that they go into this car where Alfredo puts them. There's somebody who is driving the car. It looks like a small automobile, but as per Andre's description, it has some kinds of wings and was propelled by accumulated electrical fluids. At that time, they already knew about airplanes, but that's not what he's talking about. It looks like a small automobile, like he says. So it's one of those projects that, if you've been interested in this type of transportation on Earth, you probably have seen. And if you haven't seen, just take a look and look for flying cars, and you're going to see that there's a lot of people these days here on Earth, right, doing research and trying to find a way to have flying cars. So it's nothing out of the ordinary here, and especially because we are talking about a very different type of matter, much less denser matter here. So it would not be that hard to have this on the spiritual realm. But there's one thing that's more important than the car the car itself. It's what Aniceto comments about using the car, to which we should really pay attention and see how our lives, how we are living our material lives these days. Because he says, and I'm going to quote here, Aniceto explains to Andre and explains to Vicente as well. He says, quote, "I didn't agree to use the car because I wanted to enslave you to using less effort, but because our stay at the aid station, although brief, proved to be one of the most fruitful opportunities for acquiring the knowledge you still need." Unquote. So what Aniceto wants us to understand here is that, okay, we should have been walking or gliding or volitating from where we were to Earth. However, because all this time that we spent here on the aid station was so fruitful to all of you, we're not going to waste the time that's going to take for us to come from where we are to Earth walking or volitating, because we already are, let's say, ahead of schedule here. because maybe during that time that we would be walking, we would be putting effort, we would be understanding a lot of stuff. Maybe Aniceto would be explaining a lot of things to them. But now that they had all these lessons while at the aid station, they can use the car to make this trip quicker so that they can get to the point where they are and having not wasted the time to walk there anymore. So why do I find this interesting? These days, right, on Earth, if we want to change, let's say, the channel on the TV, or if we are driving a car and we want to put the window up or down, what do we need to do? We only need to press one small button, right? To change the channel, to raise the volume, to raise the window. So everything these days is so much easier than it was in the past. However, we need to remember that because of these tasks that these days are done without a lot of effort, we have to understand that we have more time to do other stuff. But in the case of our body, right? If we needed to put the window up or down in the past, what would we need to do, right? We would need to crank that handle, right, and move our arms. So that's a small effort, but if we compare like the effort of one of our arms to do this, we are spending energy, right? It takes a little longer. It needs for us to put effort to exercise to some way, right? If we needed to change the channel in the past, what would we need to do? We would need to raise, go up to the TV, change the channel. The same with a radio, and so many other things, right? Let's say in the kitchen, what would we need to do to make a cake or to bake a cake, right? We would need to batter, right, the dough, and how would we do that, right? We would use mechanical things that it would require from us some effort. These days we press a button and we hold that button down, and then it does a lot of the work for us. But our bodies still need the exercises. So these days we are doing much less exercise than in the past. So to do some things, so therefore we need to exchange, right, to make our bodies active in other way, be it in our work, be it, doing workouts, riding a bicycle. And hooray for Francisca here, she rides the bike to work and from work, so she's very active and so on. And so a big hooray for everyone out there who is doing exercise, right, to keep up with their bodies. So what is interesting that Aniceto is inviting us to think here is that, hey, we don't want to enslave you to using less effort, right? It's not because we want to use less effort to be lazy, right? By driving cars and by doing things in like he says, using less effort, but it's because we already acquired what would be needed for our task on Earth once we stayed at the aid station. So let's say that they stopped at the aid station and they just rested, right, for 2 or 3 days. Probably Aniceto wouldn't use the car, right? He would have made them, let's walk and let's make the effort because it will be needed. It is needed for us to really think about things and to really learn something. So he makes a brief recap when he says that we all received profound lessons regarding our disturbed and suffering brothers and sisters, as well as regarding the effects of prayer. So the work has taken a big step forward, and now Andre and Vicente, because they learned all this, and his task or their tasks are of observing and learning, they already did this there, right? So they already started doing this. And now this last part before getting to Earth can be done in a quicker way so that they can keep going with their task of observing and learning. However, he goes on and says, well, but anyways, the car can only go so far, and from that point, when the car needs to stop and go back, we will have to continue on foot. So that's what's going to happen, and we already know that does happen, right? The car stops at a resting place. They are dropped off by the driver. The driver goes back, and they go on foot. But this on foot that he uses here, this expression, it's interesting because Aniceto will also explain to us that we will only have to go on foot until the moment when they have acquired, and they put it into quotation marks here, spirit wings. And naturally, that's not wings of an angel, or right. It's the way that we can, because we are not carrying such weight of the dense matter that we have right now, that the spirits and the paraspirits, they can kind of fly, right? And they can't fly as yet, but they can volatilate. That's what Andre says and mentions, right? And then Aniceto also does. They fly or volatilate, right, a little bit above the ground, and then they don't walk, but they are standing on a standing position as if they are flying on top of the ground, and that makes the trip a little bit faster and not as hard and not as tough as if it were by really walking. But while they don't have these spirit wings, quote unquote, here, they need to volatilate. They need to go on foot. And how do they acquire these wings? He explains it. He explains that it depends on the effort that they put forth to acquire them. And what is this kind of effort? Is it just to think that I'm going to have wings or we have the power? And no, it's not about physicality. And that's what he explains, and Aniceto explains. All who work, and I'm quoting here, and cooperate with their mind turned toward God can always expect the best. And this is not a promise that Aniceto is making because he is friends with Andre and Vicente. It's because it is the law. The more we tend to think, the more we practice, the more we love, we can say that the lighter we get. And the lighter we get, we can fly, right, towards that objective with more ease, right, in a less heavy, less burdensome way. And that's how they one day will be able to have those spirit wings and fly, have an easier time flying or getting to the point where they need to go. So then the flying car carries them to where they need to go, and he describes even the time, right? Almost at noon, they parked at the rest stop for refueling. The driver says goodbye and then goes back to the Campo da Paz aid station, wishing them a good trip, and leaves. Now they're going to walk from where the driver just dropped them to Earth. And from now on, he will start describing more or less the landscape, the road where they are walking on. And he says that the landscape was very cold and different than it was before. And the road that they were on, although not frightening, was very dark and foggy. The atmosphere became heavy, which, by the way, altered their breathing. Right? It is as if, let's say, we are in a forest because of all the humidity. The breathing is different than, let's say, if we are in a desert and the air is very dry, almost without moisture. And during the winter is the type of breathing. During the hot summer is a different type of breathing, and so on and so forth. So what he's saying is that even the breathing, it became different because of the denseness, because of the darkness and the fogginess in the atmosphere becoming very heavy. And naturally, we're not talking about the physicality, right? I just made the relation and I related some examples of what we have here on Earth so that we can have more or less a mental image or a mental picture of why he is saying this. So the spiritual atmosphere of the place where they are going through right now have these qualities, have these specific quantities of vibrations, of thoughts that make them feel differently about the places where they are going to. So as he said and as he mentioned, it's more or less about noon. So Aniceto will say, observing everything, that they still have 4 more hours of walking, and then they will get to the point where they need to reach. And he asks, right, for them to watch and observe what's happening, and so that Vicente and Andre and us ourselves can notice the change of what's going on around us. And what he says now, it is very important for us who are studying this, and for us to really want to look at this not as a mere fiction, but to understand that we have an impact on this spiritual life. And I'm going to quote because this is very important. And I know that we are not, or hopefully we are not, part of what he describes here. But it is very important for us to really know this so that we can counterbalance by doing exactly the opposite of what he is describing here. And I'm quoting now. Quote, "Unfortunately, in most cases, the vibrational emissions of incarnate humankind are of quite a low nature, and these regions are full of dark residue from the mental matter of unevolved incarnates and discarnates." Unquote. So if we pay attention, he doesn't say that these mental residues are from the incarnate, only the incarnate minds, are from the incarnate and discarnate minds. How are we now? We are incarnate minds. So we are ones who are helping, if I can say helping, right, to increase these dark residues of the mental matter that creates that atmosphere, because of what we think, how we think, and what we put when we are thinking these things. And not only when we think, but when we act, because naturally when we act, we were thinking before, and when we act, we think more on what we are doing. So it's one mixed with the other. So it is very important for us to really understand that our mental life, how it affects the environment where we are located in. That's why we, and people who are more, let's say, sensitive than others, can really feel a certain, let's say, dark tone when they go into places where there were, let's say, massacres, or they can find the air much better to breathe once they are in a place of prayer or in a place of stillness, where there is something there, where the mind, where the minds of those people around that place are always in prayer, or even if they are not religious people, they are praying, but they are thinking good thoughts, they are doing good deeds, and then it all changes the atmosphere. So it is very important for us that we understand this, and the more we think good thoughts, the better we make the vibrational atmosphere of our planet, of where we are living at the time that we are living. Me, for example, here now in the United States, used to live in Brazil before. Francisca, that lived around the world, lived in Brazil, lived in the UK, lived in Sydney, Australia. Now she's living in Germany. So independently of where we are, what we think makes better or worse the atmosphere of the place that we are living. So let's think good thoughts, as we tend to hear, and we hear so many times. And then they keep going, right? They keep walking. Aniceto tells them that, hey, it's not frightful, but they are quite dark. In 2 hours, they will find signs of sunlight. So it means that it is as if they are going through this place where there's lots of clouds, and these clouds are exactly these mental vibrations that we humans keep emitting, and they condensate or they form in a certain region where they have to go through. Andre keeps describing, right, that the pilgrimage was very heavy, was very harrowing, very disturbing, very distressing. And he makes a comment that this road that they are taking from that aid station to Earth, and remember, we've been repeating this. If you haven't heard yet, you can always go back to our website, KardecRadio.com, and find there our previous shows that were recorded, and listen to the whole study that we had on the book No Solar, which is the first book of this series that we are studying. And he went to Earth as well. And then he, at this point here on the messengers, he mentions that this travel at this moment is very different than the one that he made from No Solar to Earth. So we have to remember that these spiritual cities, or these spiritual colonies, in this case here, Campo da Paz aid station and No Solar, they are located in different places, right, in the space. And so No Solar probably has a more direct connection, or the road or the way that they go is different than what Campo da Paz, where Campo da Paz is located. So they have to go through different ways or different pathways. And so he compares these two trips, and he says that it's very, very different now from what he remembers, that the trip that he took when he was in No Solar to Earth, and now this trip that he is taking with Aniceto and Vicente from Campo da Paz to Earth. And he says that when he stops to think about those spirits that, let's say, live in Campo da Paz and go to Earth, how thankful we need to be to those spirits that need to go through all this trouble, quote unquote, here, to come from the spiritual realm, or where they are living, to Earth at these trips that they need to do, right? We have to remember that not all of them, of course, need to go through the same experience that Andre is going at this very moment. In this specific case, for example, Aniceto, maybe he's going through this trouble of going through this road as slowly as he is because of Andre and Vicente, right? He probably could have come much faster because he probably already has those wings that he mentioned before. However, anyways, it is very important for us to really think about the trouble that they already had to go through, and that they go through when they come to help us, right? Once we pray to some of these spirits, right? What are they really? What is the effort that they are really putting to come in our aid, right? To come to help us. So we need to really be be very, very thankful to so many things that we sometimes are not even aware of. So it is important for us to keep our gratitude up to the world and to the world of spirits. Keep our gratitude up to God that allows us to live, that allows us to have this help once we need. And then Andre comes to describe that he sees some monsters, right, as he describes them, hiding in the background of the landscape, and he doesn't want to describe them. And Aniceto tells him that he cannot offer more information on these creatures, on these monsters, so that Andre doesn't create mental images of an inferior nature in our minds, the ones who are reading his accounts. It is very interesting for us to really think about this, because how responsible are we when we say something, let's say to a child, when we say something to a person that really create a mental image of an inferior nature on the minds of that person. Right? So we have to be very careful, and this is a very interesting way of putting this, as Andre is doing. He could have probably come and described a lot of these things, but the question that this raises is, why would he spend his time talking about these very bad things instead of saying that, well, there were those spirits, these images or these spirits with those forms? Why am I going to spend time talking about them if I can say that they are here, but I don't need to describe them and go on and talk about the good things? Naturally, it is important for us to find the balance, right? We cannot hide the truth, right? We need to say that there exists, right, some of these spirits who have these weird forms, and he already mentioned some of these before in the previous book, and in this book as well. But once we are having nightmares and seeing these kinds of stuff, this and that, but we need to really find a balance instead of wasting lots of pages describing the bad stuff just to make a brief comment on, oh, this was just for you to see what's happening, and then create all those images. And unfortunately, we are still so attached to these base fears, to these to our animal nature, or animalistic nature, that these are gripping to all of us. So it's not for us as spiritists to keep spreading these inferior types of images in other people's consciences. And as a tip or as an advice, if you want to know a little bit more about this very specific topic, you can go to No Solar and go back to the book No Solar, and there's a chapter where Andre describes what happens to those writers who create those types of descriptions, and once they get to the spiritual plane, once they discarnate, because of all those terrible mental images that they create for themselves while they're writing, and also for the ones who are reading them. If you want to know a little bit more about this, I recommend you to go and read chapter 17 of the book No Solar. The title of this chapter is In Lysias' Home, and it is not the whole chapter that deals with this, but it's a comment that they make there while they are at Lysias' house at that specific moment, and then somebody makes a comment about the psychological poison that some of these authors write, and this poison meaning the poison for the mind of these mental dark and negative mental images that they create once they are writing. So it is very important for us to take also, right, this lesson from Andre and from Lysias and from Aniceto. Right? Let's not create mental images of an inferior nature in the minds of those who are reading, who are listening to us, because it can have a very dark and lasting impression, allowing these spirits and allowing us to go into dark places where we should not be going anymore, as we are always and also trying to reach the very bright light of our dear Master Jesus, and also of the brightest light of our dear Creator, God. So they keep going, right? And more or less at the time where Aniceto said 2 hours, they started to see a glimpse of the light of the sun, as if it were early morning. And Andres says that the spectacle was magnificent and new to him. A mild warmth began to reinvigorate them. So it is interesting that, well, it just mentioned light, and then light comes up, right? Light shines, and then this light reinvigorates them. And we all know that this light also, and the warmth, also invigorates us. And Aniceto makes a very, very nice comparison here, and says that how wonderful the sun is. And he says something that when I first read a while ago, it was something that really struck me. Because we tend to, when we don't know something, when we don't understand the specifics of something, we tend to make comparisons, right? So that we can have at least something to relate to. And in this specific case, he is talking about the sun. So he uses the metaphor, or he uses the sun for us to think about God. We cannot see God. Well, God has not a form, or at least not a form that we are able to see or able to grasp. Let's even say that. As per the spirits of the codification of Allan Kardec's codification say, God is the supreme intelligence, right? The first cause of all things. This is not at all a material definition. So some of us need, let's say, need a physicality to understand something. We need a representation. That's why we can understand why people see Jesus as being God. It is as if we need something to relate to. In Spiritism, we see that Jesus is also a creature of God. It was created by God, like a spirit, like all of us. So Jesus is not God. But since Jesus was and is the most perfect spirit that has ever entered earth, that has ever stepped on earth, and he is so far away from us in terms of perfection that to some degree we cannot even distinguish Jesus' perfection from God's perfection. So it is completely understandable that we still have this huge confusion in our minds, in our Christian minds, of thinking that Jesus is God. So what Aniceto does here is that he takes a physical representation and says, and I'm going to quote here because I think his explanation is really, really interesting in this sense. He says, quote, "In physical nature, it is the best image of God we know of. The sun is displayed in the most varied combinations within the solar system according to the substance of the realms we inhabit," unquote. And later on, he says, after describing how we humans perceive the sun depending on where we are physically, so he mentions no solar, right? That we see the sun from no solar in a different way than we see the sun when we are here on Earth. And he even makes us imagine how would we see the sun if we were in Jupiter, or if we were on Venus, or if we were in Saturn. So the sun is always the same. However, depending on where we are, and if we take the metaphor to our spiritual lives, where we are spiritually, how much can we clearly see the sun, it will have a different way. We will see it differently. We will perceive the sun differently. How do we perceive God these days? Each one of us will perceive God in a different way. We may be all spiritists, for example, who are listening to this now, or hopefully not only spiritists. So how do you see God? It is different than how I see God, than how Francisca sees God. Why? Because we are in different, quote unquote here, planets, right? We are in different vibrations. We see the world differently due to our background, due to our spiritual involvement. So what I find very beautiful and very powerful about this description that Aniceto does to us is that he provides us with this image of the sun and with this whole metaphor for us to understand God as a being of light, full of warmth, that embraces all of us, that gives life to us, that gives light to us, that provides this energy that we need to survive. But we can have clouds on top of us, and we will not be able to see God, although God is still there, right? I cannot imagine the very first person who was living on this earth, who had a certain kind of a conscience, and then all of a sudden looked at the sky and then saw the sun, and let's imagine in an eclipse of the moon or an eclipse of the sun, and then saw the sun being eaten, right? By what is that? Why is the sun disappearing in the sky? And imagining that they would die. And then all of a sudden the sun shows up again and doesn't disappear, only disappear temporarily, and how relieved they were. So us, we are the same way, right? Sometimes we enter in a state of despair as if God is disappearing and questioning God. But once we calm down, once we start to think a little bit more about it, once we start to think that we are still alive, once we start to feel that there are still people around us that need us and that we need them, we tend to allow the clouds to pass and then see God again in all its splendor, in all its warmth, replenishing our vital energies. So it is a very, very interesting description that Aniceto gives to us about God. But, well, they go on, right? And they were moved by what Aniceto was saying. Andrea keeps describing that the road sometimes was light, though sometimes it was not so easy to go, and he was noticing differences. And then at a certain distance, they started to see Earth, not from a far away point of view. Once let's say we were as if we were in the moon, and then seeing the sphere, right, or the circle that the moon is, or sorry, the circle or the sphere that the Earth is from far away. But no, he starts to see and physically see the Earth as if we are close to it, but a little far away, but we see the horizon and so on. Sunset starts to approach, so it means that they've been walking for about 4 hours as the sunset, more or less, at probably that time of the year, goes at around, or happens at around 6 p.m. And Aniceto seems extraordinarily happy, and then he goes and exclaims that they have entered the zone that directly influences the Earth's surface. And then, from then on, from there where they are on, they will be able to practice volitation because they are closer to the Earth by using the force or the gravitational force that the Earth exerts to all the bodies that are connected to the earth. And then he says something that I'm going to quote again here because I think it's very interesting to make a brief comment on it. He says, quote, "The light bathing us is the result of the magnetic contact between the positive energy of the sun and the negative energy of the planetary mass," unquote. So it's a mixture, just as we were talking about the sun, right? The sun comes. If we have some clouds, we will still receive the light of the sun, but it will be influenced by those clouds that the light is going through at that specific moment. So the color will change, the denseness of the light will change, and all that stuff. So what he's saying here is that there's the positive energy of the sun. And if he's mentioning magnetic, and if we think of a magnet, we have the negative pole and the positive pole. This is not necessarily something negative in terms of spiritual terms, or positive in spiritual terms, but it's more of a necessary. It is necessary. If we can imagine light at the end of of the spectrum, and then mass or physicality at the other end of the spectrum, right? As we have in relativity, that energy can become mass and mass can become energy, and we have all those equations, and the most famous one by Albert Einstein, when he says that energy equals mass times the speed of the light, or the speed of the light squared. So showing us that we can transform one into another. Not easy, but it can be done. So it's not the positive that he mentions here is not necessarily the positive spiritually and the negative spiritually, but this type of energy that will become influenced by the other once they reach. So the sun is emitting light. The mass here that we have on Earth is the mass that doesn't emit light. So once they touch, quote unquote, each other here, they form the type of light that we are being bathed with here once we are on Earth. André then says, okay, we are here, but from now on, how do we go, right? How do we find our way? And Aniceto says, well, we must not forget that our colonies, and he is here talking about Nosso Lar and Campo da Paz and all these colonies that are connected close to each other, are situated in the magnetic field of South America. So they are all around or on top, if we can use the location on top here, of South America. So we already know more or less where we are. An ordinary compass would work, but since we don't have them and we don't need to use them, we have to educate ourselves, educate our minds to find our way around by using the energy, right, of this field that can lead us to where we are going to. I'm not going to enter into details here because I'm not a physics teacher. I'm not an expert in physics, but it's maybe I could relate to, and people and biologists, for example, still don't understand completely how does a bird know that it's going south or going north once they are migrating to escape, let's say, winter, and spring is coming, and then we see the flocks of birds coming up to mate and to reach for food again, and so on. So it's probably the same type of physicality that Aniceto is describing to us at this specific moment. So they start to volitate. Aniceto already knows the way, so he's just explaining to us how to do it, and explaining to André and Vicente that we need to be in tune with this. And so they go, keep volitating, and they see the forests of Petropolis. Petropolis is a city close to Rio de Janeiro. It's a very famous and a very important city around Rio de Janeiro. But before they reach there, they stop close to the seacoast to take long, deep breaths of air. And it is very interesting. And here I'd like to recommend a movie. It's a famous movie in some sort. Some people like it, some people don't like it. I personally find it to be very, very interesting, the way they depict some parts of the story. This is not a spiritist movie per se, but since it depicts these quote unquote here angels, right? These discarnate spirits, and the relationship of some of these spirits to the physical world and some of the conflicts. Naturally, they call them angels, but if we put into the movie the spiritist perspective, we will understand those spirits or those angels to be spirits, to be discarnate spirits. And because they are not perfect, that's why we really understand that they are spirits. And the struggles that they go through once they find that they can be in relationship with the natural, with the physical world. But why am I remembering this movie right now? It's because there are scenes where those spirits are at the sea, right, or at the beach, right, breathing the air of nature. And I find it to be very interesting the way that Andre describes it here, right? Because by Aniceto's suggestion, they are at the sea coast, right, to take long, deep breaths of air, as if they are using not only the light of the sun, but also the air of the sea, of that nature, to renew their energies, right? And then he says, Andres says that Vicente and himself were very, very and positively exhausted, that they realized that the effort had been significant for their scanty energies. He describes how the noise of the surrounding, right, passers-by hurried along indifferent to their presence. Their minds were weighed down with problems of material nature, buzzes around, honking their horns. The large bay, though, seemed full of renewing energies. So I can really depict Aniceto, Andre, and Vicente there, maybe with some other spirits around, breathing that air to get the energies of the nature of that sea coast, of the sea, right? That's been also bathed by the vital energies provided by the sun, the vital energies provided to us, to all of us, by God. And then we reach the end of the chapter when Aniceto invites all of us to take a break. He says, quote, "Let's take a break. You too look exhausted. I'll show you that No Solar also has some retreats on the planet's surface." And that's what we're going to find next week, or starting next week. How are those retreats or those workshops that we find here on Earth for replenishing, also for renewing the energies, not only at the sea, as Andre, Aniceto, and Vicente are right now, but together here with us, the incarnate ones, who are willing to help those spirits who come from these aid stations to help us and to work together with us to perform the good works of God, so that we together can improve ourselves by helping other people to improve themselves, by working together, thinking of the love that Jesus taught us and that God gives to us every single second of our lives. So as Aniceto says, let's take a break, not because we are exhausted, but because time is up and we need to wrap up this program today so that we can all think about what we studied, try to use them, try to use these teachings in our lives, and also hope that by next week we are all back here together at the same time on KardecRadio.com to study another chapter of the messengers in our home. Have a great week, everyone. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to Kardec Radio, broadcasting live every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Email us and share your comments at www.kardecradio.com. Until next time, we wish you many blessings.